Good morning, everybody. Chief Landrum at the U.S. Border Patrol Academy, coming to you with another episode of the What's Important Now podcast. There are times throughout our career where individuals have the ability to impact you as a person. And there are times in the Border Patrol where an individual has the ability to impact many people, thousands of people, as the way that person conducts themselves, the way that person leads, the way that person treats other people. Today I have the opportunity to introduce you to Julie Gallagher Maroney, a Supervisory Border Patrol agent, course developer instructor at the Law Enforcement Safety and Compliance Directorate in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. Julie, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. So there's a lot to talk about with Julie Gallagher. Obviously, your full legal name is Julie Gallagher Maroney, but I think everybody in the U.S. Border Patrol that knows you as Julie Gallagher, and that's really important for several reasons that we'll kind of dive into over the course of our conversation today. But I kind of want to start off with talking about your upbringing a little bit, right? So you are from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Not Lancaster, but Lancaster,
yeah.
Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And you attended Temple University in the late 90s. During that time where you're studying criminal justice at Temple University, you're also a competitive collegiate athlete in the gymnastics arena. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your time there at Temple and then your time on the floor of the gymnastics world?
Sure. So I grew up kind of close to Temple University. It wasn't necessarily under my radar that I would ever be a collegiate athlete, but I had started gymnastics at a young age, and I loved the sport. I took to it well. I really loved the athleticism behind it, and it was just a sport that really stuck with me. As I got closer to looking at college, there seemed to be an opportunity there to compete. I had gotten away from the sport a little bit towards the end of my high school, which kept me from being recruited. So I went to the university. I talked to the coaches, and they encouraged me to walk on. They said I could do just a few events. I didn't have to do all the events. And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna give it a try again. I love the sport so much, and I just got away from it for a little bit. And that's what I did. I ended up competing for the team in vault and on even bars. Yes. But they ended up giving me a scholarship while I was there.
Well, congratulations on that.
Thanks.
I want to talk about a little bit about competing. This probably plays out over the course of your career, especially as we kind of go into entering into the ranks of the U.S. Border Patrol and then what you do after that. How important is competition at that level to kind of drive who you became over time?
I don't even know if it was competition. I think it was more the team and the teamwork aspect of it that really drove me. You're there. You're not, especially at the collegiate level, you're not competing for yourself. You're competing for your school, or you're competing for your team and with your team, and you're representing your school all over the country. So that was probably the biggest takeaway from being a collegiate athlete, I think.
That's perfectly said. So your final year of college, you get this internship with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Mm-hmm. Where was that, and how does this eventually walk you down the path of law enforcement, federal law enforcement?
Yeah, it really did. It was definitely the door, because I wasn't 100% sure. You know, you're always kind of question your career path a little bit, like, is law enforcement something I want to do? I think it's what I want to do, but how do you know until you do it? Yeah. So I was at the ATF. I worked with this really great group of men and women, and they started to talk to me about applying for other agencies, like what did I want to do, where did I want to go. At the time, ATF was not hiring. They started talking amongst each other about different agencies that were currently hiring. This was in 2000. And they're talking to each other, and one of them brings up the Border Patrol. But they don't bring it up like in a good way. They bring it up in a way like, the Border Patrol is like, no, you don't want to do the Border Patrol. It's crazy. You go to the academy, and they run you to the ground, and you get hurt. Like, it was like not, it was like a challenge. Came across as a challenge. Like, it's one of the hardest academies in law enforcement. And I don't know that, you would even want to live out in the West. And I was like, well, in my mind, I had been out West once, and I'm like, I absolutely want to move. I would love to live out West. I am absolutely up for a physical challenge. This sounds like a really good thing to explore. So during 2000, there wasn't Google didn't exist. It was I think internet was still kind of new. So I did, I was able to search it somehow on the computer. I think it was LexisNexis or something.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And it came up and they were hiring. So I dropped my name in the hat. And the next thing I know, I'm in this little room in Philadelphia with 13 other people taking a test, and I passed it. And I mean, it goes from there. I graduated that May, and then I was hired that January. So
you graduate from Temple in May, and you spend 6 months preparing for the U.S. Border Patrol Academy, and then you enter on duty with the 463rd session that took you to the Naco, Arizona station. So you go from Lancaster to Naco.
Yes.
So you wanted to go out west, and that might be ground central for west there in Naco. So tell me a little bit about Naco.
Naco, it was... So I lived in Sierra Vista, and it was a great experience. The traffic was crazy. It was busy, and as soon it didn't take long. When I was at the academy, I still didn't really understand the job or what I would actually be doing. And I'm sure it was the same for you.
Oh yeah.
For you, back then,
I was just trying to survive.
Yeah,
I was trying to graduate.
Yeah,
and then I'll figure the rest out when I get there.
I just want to make sure I pass my law test.
Right.
I don't know what I'm actually going to be doing when I get to the field. So I get to the field, I get into my the field training unit, and I mean, it didn't take long before I was like, this is amazing. Right. This is a job for me. Being outdoors, getting to hike, going after bad guys. It was it was awesome. Yeah, so Jason Owens, former chief of the academy, and I had the same conversation when he interviewed me as I was assuming command of the academy, and we talked a little bit about what my intent was. And I was like, you know what, I had every intention of coming into the U.S. I was 18 years old, came in the U.S. Border Patrol, and I was going to go to a 3-letter agency, ATF, DEA, FBI, didn't really matter. I was going to get the degree and move on. Then I got to do the job. Yeah. Right? Then I got to do the job with the people that we do the job with. And until there's... you and I can sit here and talk about it and talk about the spirit of Corps, the camaraderie and everything that comes along with it. But once you've actually walked that mile, literally and figuratively, with the people that you're asked to do this job with, you get bitten by that bug, and it's hard to even come out of it. Yeah. So you graduate the 463rd, you go to Naco, and in December of 2002. You successfully completed the BORSTAR Basic Academy as a member of Class 6. There's kind of a lot to unpack there. First of all, it's really, really young in your career. That is amazing. So tell me a little bit about that. Tell me a little bit about why Class 6 was really important. I think this is where we start to standardize the way we look at our special operations groups as a group, and how we kind of apply some methodology to the training and then kind of form these teams over time. And then tell me about being a female, going through these rigorous training and something that previously and arguably was held just for males. Yeah. So the BORSTAR idea, or the BORSTAR team, came kind of under my radar when I was just finishing up at the Border Patrol Academy, and there were some guys that were some of the PT instructors. I was a standout in PT. So it was definitely my favorite thing of the day. I'm much more like a physical person versus an academic person, But they kind of pulled me to the side right before I graduated and said, we have a team called BORSTAR. It's a very physically challenging process, academy. You might want to look into it once you've made it to the point where you would qualify to apply. So I said, okay, cool, and I kind of forgot about it and just went on about being an agent. And then the buzz around BORSTAR, I guess there was an academy coming up in 2002. I started to hear a little bit more about it, and then I started to prepare for it. I started to talk to some people that were current members or former members, and I put a memo in. I was not quite at my 2 years, but I thought to myself, I'm close.
Yeah.
I mean, the worst they can do, I'll do the memo, and the worst they can do is they'll just kick my memo back, and I'll just go back to the scope team. I was having so much fun. It didn't matter to me if they accepted me that time or for the next class. But my memo went through. So I'm like, next thing I know, I'm doing the PT test and doing the field evaluation in Tucson. Then I was invited to the academy, and then I was a member of the team.
Awesome.
And it was 30 days it was undoubtedly, it was hard. I think one of the hardest things for me was I didn't know what it was like to fall out of runs or fall out of reps. And it's very humbling when you're being PT'd and you have to do, like I did more push-ups than I think I've probably ever done in my life in those 30 days. Yeah. And you just get pushed to a point. You just keep going. The idea is you have to keep going through it. You don't give up.
Right.
You don't quit.
Yeah.
And you know what? It stinks like struggling through push-ups or struggling through a hard run. But at the end of the day, these teams, you don't want people that are going to quit when things get hard.
Yeah, that's so great story. A couple of things to unpack right there. Number one, you didn't put yourself in a box because you said, you read the solicitation memo, and back in the day when she's talking about 2 years, you had to have 2 years as a Border Patrol agent, which qualified you for consideration to be an operator, whether it be BORTAC or BORSTAR, and from there's a whole selection process. But the point here is you did not take no for an answer necessarily. You did not limit yourself, and it's a great story for folks that are out there considering things. If you want to be a dog handler, you want to go to SOG, you want to do whatever interests you, and you're really, really close and on the cusp, the worst you can do is apply and be told no. It's that easy,
What's the worst that could happen?
That's right. Nobody's going to look down upon like, hey, sorry, you just didn't meet this time requirement. Please try again in 6 months when it comes up, and we'll consider you. Fair enough. Mm-hmm. Or you become Julie Gallagher and you slide in. And I think we talked about this. There were several classmates that were right on that 3 week a month club. So it wasn't just you. There was no special accommodations for you. It was folks that I think probably they looked at it and said, okay, he or she will graduate by the time this whole process is over and be well tenured to meet the requirements in terms of tenure for this team. So that's number one. And then number two, you weren't the stud anymore, right? So it's a great lesson when you want to talk about these SOG teams, right? This BORTAC, BORSTAR, et cetera, is what are you going to do when everybody else is just as good as if not better than you? And the one thing that you can control is whether or not you quit.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a good lesson for those folks that, we're talking about humility. We're talking about hard work, perseverance, preparation, readiness to do those things. You've got to be committed and arguably committed mentally because physically you were a stud.
Mental. Yeah. It's the mental commitment in the end of.
Yeah. I mean, nobody trying out for these teams is probably not capable physically of doing these things. If you make it to the levels that you're trying to go, it's just a matter of, are you going to quit when times get hard? And I think that's, we should expect that out of our special operations group operators, and that, the return that we get on that investment is really, really high for the country. So you're on the team. You're in Class 6. This is where we start to standardize the application of a methodology for training in the Special Operations Group. We start to actually coalesce and become a team. But before that, you go back out to Tucson. You graduate. Where did you go to the BORSTAR Academy at the time?
It was in Fort Huachuca, in Sierra Vista. I didn't realize that at the time I was lucky to be, I was training in that high elevation. Right. And then the first National Academy happened to be held in Sierra Vista at Fort Huachuca. So that was really cool.
So I in a former life, when I was a trainee, I heard Chief Louis Barker, may bring back some memories, but I won, I was awarded Agent of the Year, and I said the exact same thing you just said. I said I got lucky, and he said luck is when opportunity meets preparation. And I will never forget that. That was 21, 22 years ago. Awesome. So obviously you were preparing yourself. You submitted your application to have the opportunity. You earned the opportunity, and you won. So that's luck was an opportunity meets preparation. That applies to you too. So you're doing, at the time, so you're training in Tucson, you're on the Tucson team. And describe for me, this is, 2000 to probably '06, right, where you're just operating. What's the environment like? And contextualize the flow of migration through Tucson specifically at this time against your requirements to keep people alive.
Yeah.
Find them and keep them alive.
So the way Tucson BORSTAR was set up was really great, and I think it's still set up like this to this day. We had a new commander come into place as soon as my class came on. He was actually my classmate. And he basically was like, all right, you guys go patrol the border, and then when you get call for the rescue, make sure you are available to answer that call. So that was his stipulation for you can go work your traffic, but you need to be available for BORSTAR calls. So it was crazy. I could not believe the thousands of people that were crossing every single day. And I couldn't believe all the people that were dying. I saw the first couple of years, there were so many body bags. I lost track of how many folks died out there. So that was a summer of a lot of firsts, but that's kind of what you have to, that's where you start getting that tough skin. Seeing the family units out there, the kids out there, all the medical calls, all the different rescues. I flew a ton with our, at the time there was the ABCI operation, 2005, 2006. So all these helicopters and pilots were detailed in. So I was spending a lot of time in the air and on the ground, participating in search and rescue missions, and in just regular, Border Patrol agent work, pulling over vehicles, tracking out groups. We were working seams, so we were between the Ajo and Casa Grande seam and between the Casa Grande and Tucson seam. So back then, I have friends from all three of those stations, and I feel like I was more of an agent, like a Tucson CAG agent, like I was their adopted BORSTAR annoying sister. And I was like, help me pull a vehicle over. Nice. Help me with my bailout. But yeah, I got close to a lot of those agents out there.
I think a couple of things there. Number one, I like what you said up front. You were a Border Patrol agent first. So yes. You were on the Special Operations Group team, or this SOD, Special Operations Detachment, as it relates to being within the Tucson sector, Special Operations Group being the national team in El Paso. But your requirements were to go out and, as you characterized it, work traffic, which is, do the things that we have been asked to do, interdict, humans or narcotics coming across the border. And in Arizona at the time, there's plenty of each to do. And what it does, as from a Border Patrol agent's perspective, is it doesn't create this I'm better than you scenario.
Yeah.
So you're in Special Operations Group and you've got all this extra training. You're probably wearing a cool new uniform. You don't look like the rest of us, but you don't have this elite attitude where you don't have to do the same things that your brother or sister that you just mentioned has to actually do in the field.
Yeah, and that was so important to me to not put myself above anybody else that was out there, because I know how it could come across and how sometimes those impressions were there. And I know as I became more aware of that, I would try to always take a transport van out so that if I wasn't doing anything, anytime I could help, give back and help a Tucson or Casa Grande agent with anything, I was always trying to be very aware and do that for them.
No, that's outstanding. I think that sometimes, special operations may or may not get a bad rap for some of these things. You don't necessarily see the requirements that they have to perform, whether within a sector or a national. But at the same time, I think, all the ones that I know have always subscribed to the mantra that they're Border Patrol agents first. Despite what they're asked to do differently. Yeah. And I think, you talk about, you're asking your friends for help, and you wanted to make sure you demonstrated for them why, that you remembered you were an agent first. I think this kind of goes back to why I said, in the beginning, you as an individual have had an impact on people generally throughout your entire career, and it's for things like that, because you've never forgotten where you came from, and you always remembered that you were an agent first. So from there, let me ask you this. How many rescues do you think were for migrants against, say, American citizens? How much work did you do to kind of, there's a whole host of people in this desert area, in this desert environment that require our assistance. So just because you're a Border Patrol agent doesn't mean you can't extend beyond the lens of, interdicting migration and apply your life-saving capabilities to an American citizen.
Yeah, so we would partner, oftentimes Pima County Search and Rescue, they would tap into us, our people and our assets to help them. We did all kinds of things with them. Probably the most high-profile case I participated in was looking for, there was a little girl that went missing in Tucson. They ended up finding her body years later. She was 6 years old. And it was just like all hands on deck. It was so nice just to be a part of that and to try to help with that search and rescue or that, recovery mission. But
yeah, it's a great frame. And we talk a lot about 21st century policing. What does that look like? We can talk a lot about being warriors on the border, and maybe that's a way that law enforcement used to be portrayed or used to act. But moving forward, we're looking at how do we kind of round these edges off of being a warrior on the border, but at the same time, being a guardian. And then one of the ways in which to do that is the different ways that we train. We start to build relationships better in communities in which we serve, be human in terms of our interactions with other agencies, and they will call you.
Yep.
They understand what you're about. They understand that at the core of your mission, you as an operator for BORSTAR, you're about searching, finding, rescuing, saving lives. So just to be called in a scenario where a member of the community, just so happens this was a 6-year-old little girl, that they wanted you guys to help is kind of a reflection of who we try and portray ourselves as an organization.
Yes.
There's tons of media out there that allows people to tell one side of the story or another. But at the end of the day, take it from an operator, we are trying to be the best of both warrior and guardian in our organization today.
Yeah.
So after your time spent in Tucson, the desert, the West Deserts and all of Tucson, you start going over to stand up the Special Operations Group in El Paso as it relates to BORSTAR.
Yes.
This was in 2007 to 2010. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, Tucson was so busy. We didn't get to do a lot of operational things outside of our sector because it was just, we had too much in our own backyard. And we were always having people come in and detail in to help us out. And I saw that as an opportunity to be able to do things to participate in BORSTAR from a national level and to do things out of other sectors that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do if I would have been an asset out of Tucson, just simply because we were so busy. So being there allowed me to, I TDY'd to, I don't know how many sectors. I think almost every sector at one point doing a training mission or an operational mission.
That's crazy. So it's important to note here, you're still a Border Patrol agent, right? And I mean that in terms of you're not a supervisory Border Patrol agent yet. You're not a field operations supervisor or watch commander. You're operating at our journeyman level because it meant that much to you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it was important to me that I did, in my mind, I had things I wanted to do before I became a supervisor, and I wanted a certain level of field experience. And I had wanted to be a PT instructor. That was huge for me. So I did that, and I taught 2 classes. I spent 10 months in Artesia. And then I went to SOG because I wanted to do operations on a national, in some cases, an international level. Right. And I knew I'd have to go to SOG if I wanted to do that. Yeah. So those were the boxes I really wanted to check off. For me personally, those were the experiences I really wanted to have as a Border Patrol agent, and I did it.
Yeah, it's a super important story. You hear this often. The instructor cadre at the Border Patrol Academy throughout time, whether it's today or when you and I came through the Border Patrol Academy, there's always at least one person, and arguably more than that, that impacts you in a really positive way, right? And maybe you want to give back to being an instructor at the academy, or by being an instructor at the academy, based on your interactions with that person or that group of people. So while we talk about all the training that occurs here, I don't want to lose sight of the quality of people that are actually delivering that training and what it means to them. I've said this oftentimes. throughout the staff that I've been here for the first 60 days or so is I kind of underestimated that the Border Patrol Academy isn't the cadre's first stop. So everybody that's here chose to be here. They all came to be here. It's like going to advanced training. It's like going to the LESC. Mm-hmm. You chose to be there. So you apply yourself in different ways based on what drove you to that particular work. So I think it's a really important story, and you got to fulfill that dream by coming back and giving back in the PT department by being an instructor for 2 classes. So that's good. And then from there, you go on to actually standing up the BORSTAR team at SOG, right? Yep. You got to check the box of PT. You get to check the box of standing up SOG and doing some international and national events. In 2010, you decide that this is the time where I'm ready to become a supervisor.
Yep.
You kind of blanket the country. You're putting in for all kinds of Border Patrol agent supervisory positions. You're putting in for Special Operations Group supervisory positions, SODs, and Tucson calls.
Tucson called.
Right.
Yep. And it definitely felt like that was the next. I was definitely ready for that step in my career. By that time, I had traveled so much. I like I said, I'd really gotten everything I had wished for and wanted up to that point. And I thought, now, like, it sounds like cliche, but I'm like, this is like, if BORSTAR brings me on as a supervisor, it'll be good, like, because now I can give back. Because supervisors don't have as much fun as operators or as agents, right? So, but then you get to a point where it's kind of like your time to do that and help the younger generation come up. So it was, I was coming up on 10 years, and I thought, yeah, this is good. By that time, I had done a lot of acting supervisor and acting FOS work. Mm-hmm. Don't ask me how that happened. Like, it was kind of weird because the SOG didn't have supervisors. Right. They only had FOSs. Right. So when we would go into an acting position, we would jump up to an acting FOS. Right. That's just how it was structured at the time. But yeah, I was ready for that SBPA position, and Tucson hired me in August of 2010. I got the call.
So at the same time, you also, for those of you know, you have a brother who works in Tucson at the exact same time you're about to promote to supervisory Border Patrol agent. And Julie's life is coming together. Yeah, it's coming together. You get to go back out to where you started. You get to reunite with family. Yep. And you have a conversation with your brother late August, I think, where you guys are talking about where are you going to live? What are you going to do? I got the call, and it was funny because he lived in Casa Grande with his 2 kids, and there's actually a home for sale next to him. And if you know me, I need like a bigger city. He's like, you can buy the house next door and we'll be neighbors. And I was like, no, we won't. We are going to live in Tucson. But it was a funny, like, kind of back and forth thing we had. But he was excited that I had, prior, when I was at SOG, I had been detailing back there in the summers. So I had gotten to actually work with him a little bit and do some patrols because he was assigned to Casa Grande. So that was an area I'd patrolled for years. So I would like kind of get like he would be ending mids and I'd be starting on days, and I'd jump in his truck and I'd be like, show me something. Yeah. And he'd like take me to like Stash House or something, and we'd go check something out before he was ready to roll north back to his station. So those were really special, fun times. Yeah. So like everything's in place, I think. And I think I have this path too, right? Like I'm like supervisor, and I started thinking in my mind, like maybe I could even be like a commander. Yeah. Like I could see that because by that time I had already done some pretty big missions. I had been given some really decent responsibilities at some decent missions, and I realized it gave me the confidence to realize that I could do things on a bigger scale. But I also knew the supervisor was the first box to check. Yeah. I think just to kind of book in that particular piece, I would argue you earned the opportunity to do some really big missions based upon the work that you did, which is really important. You weren't really given anything. You earned a lot of everything. So you're talking to your brother. It's late August, and then on September 2nd, you get a different call. Yeah. So September 2nd was a call that, I'll never forget. And it's, anyone that's had something like really terrible and tragic and unexpected happen to them, and there's so many of us out there.
Yeah, so I got the call that he had been in a crash, and it was something I was always concerned about because he always worked late, and and in my mind I had what happened, even though it wasn't what happened, but in my mind I made up the story already about what had happened, and my focus was to get out to Tucson as quickly as possible. I just left. I was just on detail out there, and I had just left and gone back to El Paso. So, yeah, I got the call. He had been in a crash, and I was trying to text my BORSTAR buddies were getting on scene, and I was trying to find out what was going on, and, trying to figure it all out. And before I could even leave my house in El Paso, I found out he had passed.
Yeah. So for context, your brother Michael V. Gallagher was killed in the line of duty by a drunk driver in near Tucson, Arizona.
Yep.
And today we will never forget as an organization, as a family, but it's really a day you'll never forget either.
Yeah.
So your life's coming together, and then all of a sudden it's yanked apart.
Yes. And I mean, I had to figure out where after the funeral, after everything, subsides, it's like, I was like, I can't, I don't know that I can even be a supervisor. Like, how do I be this is crazy. I can't even, like, I don't know how I'm going to make it through a day and put on bars. I don't know that I'm ready for that. And my parents were very supportive. I mean, it's like, now that I'm a parent, I'm like, how did it, like, I remember my dad telling my commander at the time, like, she just needs to get back out there. She needs to get out there, and she needs to get back out to the field. And I don't know. I'm pretty sure he probably didn't want me to do that. Yeah. But he knew how much it meant to me and how much my career meant to me. So I had a lot of support and encouragement from my dad, especially, to get the boots back on and get out there. For me, I had an EOD date. I had already been given an EOD date, and I just had pushed it up so that I could be out with my my brother's widow and the two kids. Yeah. So the first 6 months was so hard. Someone recently asked me because there were some agents that were struggling through a hard loss, and I get asked this a lot. They say, "How did you do it?" Yeah. Well, anybody put in that position is going to do it. How you do it is going to look different, maybe, but you're not going to just collapse into a ball and die. Right. You have to wake up every day. You have to get dressed every day. You have people to live for. So there's never any question, how do I do it? I'm going to do it. How did I do it as a supervisor? I didn't. The first month I was in Tucson, I don't think I went out to the field. But I knew, I was like, I got it. Like, I'm going to have to get out there. And it was an internal thing, and I don't know if my teammates recognized it, but I think the first time I went out to the field after he died, I think I might have went with somebody. I might have been like, so it was like kind of going back in. And then pretty quickly, I'm like just ripping the Band-Aid off. Like, I got to make that drive out there. My brother was killed on a highway. That's part of my patrol. Yeah. So if this is what I'm going to do, I got to do it. But in my mind, I gave myself a little grace. I was like, I'm going to give myself 6 months as a supervisor. And if I'm not being good for my guys, then I'll do something else. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to do something else. So that was like the way I set it up in my mind. I gave myself 6 months. And I'll tell you, like, the first 6 months, every time I drove out to the field when I was by myself, I cried. Yeah. And I remember someone looked at me and they're like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I cried." And someone hearing this might be like, "Oh, she shouldn't have been out in the field." But I needed to do it. Yeah. I needed to be out in the field. That was part of who I was. I had spent almost a decade out there, and it was part of what I needed to do. Yeah.
Hey, so excellent kind of walkthrough of how it impacted you. And, I could not be more happy that you're still on our team. You're salt of the earth, and the organization gave you the time and space to grieve appropriately.
We did.
And this is 10, 12 years ago now. Yeah. And I wouldn't say we're perfectly where we should be, but I think we're trying to get better every single day at it. At the same time, you made a comment about your BORSTAR buddies, your new people, the people that essentially were going to work for you, were first on scene, right? They responded to the crash that took your brother's life.
They did. They weren't first on scene, but they showed up. His classmates, he had 2 classmates that were first on scene. They were behind him. But yeah, my BORSTAR team, I know they sporadically were showing up and trying to help.
Right. So you have to now supervise the folks that go through this traumatic incident that also, by the way, is near and dear to your heart. So what does that look like? How do you take care of your team now? How do you continue to lead and make sure that their needs as they grieve are taken care of?
I think so. Back then, I think it was too early for me. Like, I remember I was more focused on my brother's classmates that were first on scene.
Yeah.
But it took a little bit longer because I was like in such a ball of grief. Like, I wasn't, a lot of times people I think would think I was angry at the drunk driver that killed my brother. Like, I was so like sad, and just the grief was so like overwhelming that I didn't have room to be angry. And I don't know how much room I had for other people's grief, because I was living with my brother's widow and the boys. So I wasn't looking outside the agency right at that time, I would say. I was still so internal with my parents, my sister, and my brother's family. But as I would say, it was maybe once we maybe got past the trial, like once we get past, whenever you have somebody that dies tragically and then you got to deal with a court situation, right, it just prolongs everything. I think once we got outside of that, that's when I could start looking at, the people that were affected and directly impacted by Mike's crash, and kind of checking in and seeing how they were doing, asking the chain of command in Tucson, what are we doing for them? What are we doing about the drinking? It's a huge issue on the tribal lands. Right. Huge.
So you have a lot of, you're dealing with a lot of grief. Your team's dealing with a lot of grief. The family's dealing with a lot of grief. But at the same time, you're also married. You have a husband. Tell me a little bit about that. My
husband is, he is not a Border Patrol agent. He is not in law enforcement, but he's a huge supporter of law enforcement. Of course, he'd have to be, right? And for us, I think it was very hard for him. He's surrounded by nothing but grieving people. Could you imagine what a rock he had to be? Yeah. Oh my goodness. And I tell you, it made me appreciate him in a way I never would have appreciated him had it not happened.
That's awesome.
It's you want perspective on a lot of different things. When something like that happens, it really has a way of shifting things into perspective.
So you spend this time grieving, you're addressing everybody's needs, and you kind of walk into helping, address your own needs, and you're still a supervisor in BORSTAR, and that's good, right? But this tragic event also leads to something positive. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so what I noticed through our sector hallways, BORSTAR was located in at Tucson sector, and they were keeping track of the DUIs that our agents were getting out in the field, and I saw by quarter, and it was increasing, and I was kind of distraught because I thought, doesn't everyone know my brother was killed by a drunk driver? It's almost like it didn't matter. And I know that in the greater picture, that's not a reasonable way to think, maybe, or rational, but that's my initial thought. And then I kind of started asking around, what are we doing about this, within our own organization? And pieces fell together. It just so happened that Chief Ortiz was starting this DUI awareness program. I had sat down with him for a few meetings to talk about what that could look like and incorporating Mike's story. And I was all in. And that's kind of how this Michael V. Gallagher project started. And it got out to a lot of agents, just really, creating awareness, about our alcohol consumption and drinking and driving and how it's not worth it to get behind the wheel.
Yeah. So it sounds like your dad was right. Right, he knew you had to just get back in the fight, and for him in his mind that meant just get back, put the boots back on, put the gun belt back on, and get back to the border. But you took that and you ran with it, and you developed this DUI awareness campaign, the Michael V. Gallagher project. And I can tell you, having gone through that, it was super impactful. It's probably the first time I ever was introduced to Julie Gallagher. I think this was back in Laredo. 2013, 2014, something like that, which is where Chief Ortiz was down in South Texas trying to stand this up. He was the deputy of RGB at the time.
Yep.
But anyway, so a lot of folks maybe have gone through that training, that Michael V. Gallagher training, but now they have a better understanding of what the impetus was and why it really is so important.
Yeah.
In 2013, you move over to the Law Enforcement Safety and Compliance Directorate at CBP's Advanced Training Center in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. You become a Supervisory Border Patrol agent, course developer, instructor. Can you tell the audience a little bit about, first of all, what is the LESC as we call it? And then within that, what do you do at the LESC?
So the Law Enforcement Safety and Compliance Directorate, we do a lot of things there. I always say it's where all things use of force is housed. For CBP, not just Border Patrol, but we're OFO, we're AMO, and we're Border Patrol, and we train all three. But that's where policy is written on our use of force application tools. It's where technology, as it relates to use of force, is looked at and developed, the latest and greatest. I think CBP, that's one great thing that people I don't think always realize. CBP is really at the front of what is out there in terms of less lethal devices and technologies. But we train instructors. We train firearms instructors to go back out to the field, and those are the instructors that will qualify their people for their quarterly training. Same with less lethal. We have a pre-deployment department. We have a policy department. So.
And what do you do within LESC?
So now I am a less lethal instructor. Yeah. So I train agents and officers from all over the country to be less lethal instructors. And it is it's the most satisfying job I've had there because I feel so directly connected to the field, and they come to us and they want to learn, they want to be the best instructors they can be, and they really come there, sit in those seats for 3 weeks, they soak up what you give them, and then they take it out to the field.
So we talked a little bit about this kind of these perfectly rounded edges between guardian and warrior, and really, I think the work of less lethal instructors and the application of less lethal capabilities is kind of at the forefront of that. So there's this conversation of could we use lethal force in certain instances, and should we use lethal force in certain instances? And this is kind of this modernization of the way we look at policing. So we're not saying by any stretch of the imagination that a Border Patrol agent is less authorized to use lethal force today than they ever have been, but we just want to make sure that they have all the tools necessary to in other words, de-escalate an otherwise really, really bad situation with the tools necessary. If they can't do that, then lethal force is still obviously always going to be authorized. But, kind of talk to me about, how this modernization of less lethal really does apply to how we do the job in the field and how we're perceived.
Well, it's really, we want them to recognize the opportunities that are there for them, where maybe in the past it wasn't always considered. Now it can be that, could this person be experiencing a behavioral crisis, a mental crisis, or is this person just not listening to me? Right. Do I have the time to assess this person. If you don't have the time, you don't have the time to, that's a big thing when we teach de-escalation, to drive home to our people so that they can drive it home to their people back at their home bases. You're not always going to have the time to de-escalate. It's not always going to be appropriate. We never ask you to put yourself or your people in harm's way because you feel like you have to de-escalate a situation when it's not appropriate. And that, to me, that's the biggest thing I try to say on the outset. I talk about these white chairs because so when I say, in my last class I said, it's not always necessary. Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't know I can't remember the exact term, but it says something like de-escalation may not always be appropriate. And I tell them, I said, at the end of the day, we don't want your people, their families, to be in those white chairs. And when I say those white chairs, I'm talking about funerals, because that's where you sit. You sit in these white chairs. And as a less lethal instructor, we're trying to keep our workforce safe. Right. That is the most important thing. And that's why, I love being a less lethal instructor, because I feel like I'm helping keep the workforce safe. Right. With what we're doing and the content that we're delivering. Right.
And the interesting part is your work's not only reflected in application as you train the trainers, if you will. So you're training the trainers to go back and deliver the training to agents in the field, but it's also reflected in policy. Right, so that's why you talk about there's a policy department in the LESC, and then there's this, kind of, let's call it tactical application of said policy, really. So without, we can put policies on paper all day long and they can be written perfectly and the intent is perfect. But until we actually sit down in a classroom and walk through it with a certified instructor to become certified instructors, there has to be a marriage of both.
You have to understand the policy. Right,
have to understand the policy and enforce the policy appropriately. Yeah. That's a huge part of what the LESC does, and I appreciate the clarification for not only what the LESC is, what it does, and then kind of what you do within that house. So thank you. As we talk about what's important now, it's the What's Important Now podcast. I like to give every guest an opportunity to kind of walk through maybe the 3 or 4 things that are really important to you right now for the captive audience to hear.
I think what is very important right now is taking care of our agents, especially our agents that have been parts of these really traumatic incidents that are out in the field. I've seen how my brothers, the first on scene agents, were also my brother's classmates. And I've seen how they've suffered through in the years past that crash. And I can't help but think if they would have had more resources available to them, maybe it could have helped them navigate the grief and the trauma a little bit better. And in this last year, having watched the same thing happen to one of my former teammates, SBPA Cox, he was killed in very much the same manner as my brother out on the tribal lands. And his first responders were our BORSTAR teammates. And they tried to actively save his life. They pulled him out of a burning car. They did CPR on him. They did everything they could to help him. And it just, so that's going to stay with them. And my question now shifts to those guys, like, how are we helping them? What are we doing for them? But since after watching what happened with Mike's in the aftermath, I was able to be more involved with what was happening with the first responders at Agent Cox's crash. And that's when I was able to talk to some folks that are on the front line there with them about some available resources. They found a great organization that could work with them and deal with them that specialize in post-traumatic, the stress that you feel after those really traumatic incidents, and try to cut it off at the legs of how it could manifest. We see it manifest a lot with substance abuse and depression. And if we can maybe help those guys, I think we're improving, and the people are in place. We have Dr. Corsu, the clinician, who was who was actively involved with them directly in the days after. I don't know if they saw it, but we were having conversations with him in the days after Agent Cox was killed. But it's really important to me, that we don't repeat our mistakes, right? Like, let's make it better. Let's make our response to those first responders better than what it was for my brother.
So thank you for that. I think just to kind of encapsulate what I think I heard, number one, resiliency, post-traumatic stress situations that occur to agents in the field. There's a lot of people that are impacted, but let's also not forget the folks who were on scene, that witnessed this, that gave blood, sweat, and tears literally to try and save somebody who maybe wasn't even capable of being saved at the time. So that's super important, that there's a downstream effect on those particular people. So make sure we are addressing those people over time is important. And then secondly, obviously, doing a little more for our people in terms of suicide prevention action. We talk a lot about suicide prevention, suicide awareness, but maybe making sure as senior leaders in the organization, we have an action plan, and we are fully illustrating that action plan to the entirety of the workforce so that they know exactly where we're at through the help of Dr. Corso and others. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. So to close out, it's customary that I ask you, we have our motto of honor first, right? So I have to ask you what honor first means to you.
So to me, honor first, staying focused on our people and our mission, maintaining our integrity, and not forgetting about those that made the ultimate sacrifice in the line of duty. Honor
first is, like, if it ain't clear to you, it's clear to me, right? Like, that's been your career since September 2nd, right? You've been working your butt off to protect his legacy, and never let us forget Michael. Yeah. I think that's done. Like, there's nothing else, that's what it's about. Julie, thank you. We look forward to hosting you for the rest of your time here, and we're looking forward to great things from you, continued great things from you, both in terms of advocacy for our people and the work that you're doing at the LESC.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Honor first.